We will move on to the panel discussion, so if the panel members can come up and join me at the front, and Caroline, if you'd like to join us as well, and I'll introduce them to you. So starting on your left, I'd like to introduce Phil Gibson. So Phil joined Mighty River Power in 2004, and he's got a broad range of experience across the business. He became GM of Hydro and Wholesale in September last year, and he's responsible for safely managing our Mighty River Power's hydro operations. And prior to joining the electricity industry, Phil spent 6 years in structural engineering roles in Auckland, Wellington and London. Sitting next to him is Victoria Crone, and Victoria is Managing Director of Xero. And as Managing Director for New Zealand, she's a key member of the global sales leadership team. She's responsible for driving relationships with government, financial institutions, corporates and media. She's also Director of Xero Limited's New Zealand operating subsidiary, Xero NZ Limited. Victoria joined Xero following 18 years with Telecom and Chorus, most recently as Chorus General Manager for Marketing and Sales. And finally, Tim Hewson is Principal of JazMax and Head of Not Yet Known. Tim has been a Principal at JazMax since 2001, joining the practice after extensive time spent working in Europe and running his own architectural design practice. His influence within JazMax is very diverse. He counts himself not only a principal, but an architect, interior designer and workplace specialist. And on that note, Tim is known for pioneering the open workplace design in New Zealand. His designs have enabled companies like Westpac, Auckland Airport and Vodafone to rethink the way they work, become more connected and collaborative, creating the foundations for innovation. Perhaps most importantly, just this year, Tim has launched the practice's creative plus strategic consultancy called Not Yet Known. Having previously led the award-winning workplace and interiors team, his work having positioned him at the intersection of workplace design and business performance. So I do have the joy, of course, of introducing myself, but I will be very brief. So I'm Matt Ensor, and I'm Business Director for Advisory at Becker. I actually trained as a civil engineer and joined as a traffic engineer, joined the profession of traffic engineering in 1989. And I've spent most of my time since then helping out clients either deal with the problems of traffic in Auckland, solve the problems of traffic in Auckland, or kind of work their way around the problems of traffic in Auckland. So I'm going to talk to you today about the digital transformation in transport and what's coming. But I also spent 4 years working for the New Zealand Ministry of Defence. And the role of my team there was an interesting one. In the 90s, the Defence Force had a lot of really old ships, really old aircraft, and really old army equipment. And so we were going through a period of quite large investment where we were spending money on things that had to last 20 or 30 years. So the specific role of my team was to make sure that we weren't just replacing what they call like with like. So when a frigate gets old, do you just buy a new frigate with new technology, or do you actually look forward for the next 20 or 30 years and say, what do we need? What is technology going to change? Maybe we don't need frigates, maybe we need something else. There's a real danger when you're spending a lot of money that you look backwards, sort of look back to the future. And so it is with transport in Auckland. The solutions that people were pushing when I joined the profession in 1989, they are still pushing. I hear a lot of things like, oh, if only 40 years ago we hadn't done that, or if only 30 years ago we had done that. So what I want to do is just apply what we learnt in defence about, yeah, it's great to do what you're really good at, good public transport, good roading systems, but let's just have a look 10 years into the future at what technology might mean for transport. I have 3 points. My first point really is the government needs to get out of the way. And what I mean by that is the regulators need to free up technical innovation for Auckland. I'm going to use Uber as the example just because everyone kind of knows Uber. You get on your smartphone, you dial up, you say, yes, pick me up here, you can watch the vehicle arrive, you hop in, it tells you and the driver which is the best way to go, you hop out, and it sends you the bill. So Uber is actually a transformative type of technology. So if you talk to the people from Uber, what they want to do is change the world so people don't feel like they have to own their own car anymore. cars spend 95% of their time parked. Actually, if Uber is so convenient, you don't need to have a car. Of course, there's an outroar in most places around the world. I was in Paris. I can still hear my ears ringing. The taxis were just sitting there with their hands on the horn, blocking all the roads. They were outraged at Uber. Actually, most regulators seem to be outraged as well. And I do want to pay tribute to Simon Bridges, our Minister for Transport. So Simon, actually I've got some quotes here. He gives great quotes. Simon said, Bridges signalled that the government will be taking the lightest touch possible to regulation, so ride-sharing like Uber, so ride-sharing technology can flourish. He said, what I want to see is a regime that allows for new technological innovations but is safe. Some change is required, but we're open to where that goes. So if Minister Bridges was sitting here, I'm sure he'd have this glorious smile on his face, because he is an internationally thought-leading Minister of Transport. New Zealand is kind of one of the leaders in the pack in thinking about this stuff. But I'm not sure how long his smile would last. I was talking to one of my colleagues at Becca. We'd just written a transport app for one of our clients. I said, Stephen, how long did it take you to write that app? He said, 3 weeks, he said. It's like, oh, that's not long. He said, well, it would have taken 3 months if we did it really well. So I just want to leave you with that point, of my first point. Imagine going to the Ministry of Transport and expecting them to update their policy and their regulations every 3 months. That's kind of what's required, is for regulators to kind of enable technology and not restrict it. My second point is very simple. Don't get excited if you're waiting to go out and buy an autonomous car. Stephen Hewitt, he was here. He's walked out. Probably knows the most. Oh, at the back there. Have a chat with Steve. Probably knows the most about the facts around autonomous vehicles. Very briefly, we have very, very smart planes, but we can't bear to let them fly by themselves. We need to put not one but two people in the front just in case those things happen. It's kind of about the same for autonomous vehicles. But what we do know is coming are what are called connected vehicles. So connected vehicles are not connected physically, they're connected via sort of a Wi-Fi kind of radio frequency, so they talk. They talk to other vehicles, they might talk to infrastructure, and they're constantly saying, here I am, this is what I'm doing, and all kinds of things. And to cut a long story short, one of the dreams that connected vehicles will give us in just 3 years' time is the ability, I don't know if you've seen it, those cars, they're travelling about this close together at highway speeds automatically. The great thing about connected vehicles is that a few milliseconds after the front guy brakes, all of the cars in that platoon brake identically. So it means that we can, as I say, finally get that dream come true. Which moves me to my last point. And I see Peter Winders here, a little bit of a smile. I think when I entered the profession, people weren't saying, you can't build your way out of congestion. It's kind of a recent thing that's happened in the last sort of 30 years. And I was trained as an engineer. You can't win an argument by just having a phrase. You've got to have some numbers behind it. And my last point is actually Auckland, if you look forward, we're now again on that cusp where we can build our way out of congestion. This is a transformation. But we're not going to build it out of congestion just through steel, asphalt, and concrete. We're actually going to build our way out of congestion through apps. That software you get on your phone, your tablet, your watch, and all those kind of things. So I want to explain why that's the case. And I'm going to use some numbers. I'm actually going to use Auckland Transport numbers to start off with. If you think of the Southern Motorway going northbound, you've got one rail line going north, and you've got 3 traffic lanes. As a traffic engineer, I know from Auckland Transport, every one of those brand new trains with 3 carriages full of people removes 288 vehicles from those 3 traffic lanes, which is fabulous. And when I would extend that, once we've finished the multi-billion-dollar investment, we have 6 carriages all full, you're basically moving 10 to 12,000 people per hour on that single railway line, which is great because that's more than we can move at the moment on 3 motorway lanes with cars. It's kind of back to the future. Look into the future. We have 1.5 people in each car. If we put them in connected vehicles and they all join up, rough calculation, we're getting 25,000 people travelling on the Southern Motorway. So if you think the difference between now and to there is actually the full capacity of that railway line running after all of our investment. It's that kind of thing. The kicker, though, is it costs nothing. Do you remember this whole model about Amazon? They don't own bookstores, but they sell books. So all the government needs to do is be able to release the technology so we can have connected vehicles in New Zealand. It gets even better. This is my final point. If we can get 4 people into each car, then those numbers balloon. In my limited experience, it's almost unlimited capacity. You're getting 50,000 people travelling on those 3 motorway lanes. Goodness knows what happens when they get to where they want to go. But again, it's for free. And Uber have just are working on what they call Uber Pool. So Uber Pool is like a car sharing where I tell Uber where I am, where I want to go. It works out all the other people who are telling it where they are, where they want to go, and it tells the driver to pick me up, then those 2 people a few blocks down, and then drive to where we are, drop me off, drop them off. So carpooling hasn't worked in the past because it's been inflexible. We want that flexibility. Things like Uber Pool will mean that we can get this amazing transformation in capacity on our road network for almost nothing. So this isn't an oh my goodness moment, let's stop building rail and road. I ran a little online thought leadership piece in Becca, and we get people to presented this to them, and I said, so what are your opinions? 40% of people said, well, that's great, but public transport must be our first priority. It's almost like an entry level for a smart city that you have to have a functioning, elegant public transport system. And the road builders, well, you can't get connected cars, intersections, despite what some people might say, really stuff up the system. So what we need is a motorway system without bottlenecks on it so people can travel around the region. So to conclude, the future for Auckland, it'll be a bit of a back to the future, but what we need to do, I think, is think very carefully that we don't leave out the benefits we can get from a digital transformation. Minister Bridges does need to lift the brakes off regulation that lets us introduce these technologies, but it will be a balanced approach to road, rail, cycling, walking. But what we need to do, as is my final comment, is welcome the app builders to the job of building our way out of congestion. So that's the answer to the 2 questions I'm about to ask these folk. So I'll move first to Phil. And this is the question I would like to ask all of you. There should be a microphone somewhere, otherwise we won't be able to record the sound. So Phil, I'm interested in from your background in Mighty River Power, what do you consider to be a smart city? And what's the relevance of a smart city to your sector? And are there any specific initiatives underway in Auckland?
Thanks. So being the energy guy, I'm expecting that you expect that I'm going to talk about smart meters, smart homes, smart grids, and therefore smart cities and jobs done, right? But we know that that's sort of possibly stuff that's happening already or may never happen, and it's kind of incidental, it might happen in the background, and it's not the real driver. For me, when I think about smart cities, I think about cities that attract investment, talent, and then outperform other cities on metrics of the environment, the economy, health, housing, education, art, entertainment, sport. You might even attract some of the rugby players into Auckland. And I think that that's all about attitude of the people rather than technology or energy. And the second half of the question was, what's the role of electricity in all this? And electricity is this funny product, right? It doesn't really do anything. And yet it underpins all of the things that we need to do, and all the things that we do. And in New Zealand we have this additional benefit that the electricity system is the envy of the world. So how can you leverage that to make your city more attractive than others? And I'm talking about New Zealand and Auckland is the same place, so excuse me. But, so when I say the envy of the world for electricity, electricity on a global scale, internationally is measured in terms of affordability, reliability and sustainability. So is it cheap, is it green, and does it work? And New Zealand hits it out of the park on all 3 of those metrics. And in fact, there's been a recent study by the World Energy Council that puts New Zealand in the top 10 of 140 nations and on that triangle. So you kind of go, well, that's a good thing. We should be pretty happy about that. And Auckland's getting smarter from an electricity perspective. So what I'm trying to say in there is we've slipped out smart meters into the population over the last 7 or 8 years. So to have about 85% penetration through Auckland. Now, it's not really potentially doing a hell of a lot right now. You mentioned Glowbug in the intro there. Glowbug's a prepaid electricity product that relies on smart meters to deliver a service to customers, and over time there'll be more services that deliver on the needs of customers as opposed to the electricity supplier jamming down the wire and people taking it if they want it or not if they don't. And that'll drive efficiency and better use, better tariffs and better competition. And the last thing that I want to mention about electricity and how it might play a part in the smart city is, Auckland's got this great opportunity to become a poster child for transport electrification. And that's really important. If you think about the context of the smart city, if you're talking about a city in Dubai, sand, cash, oil, whatever it is, in Auckland it's quite a different context, and taking advantage of those natural amenities and characteristics. And so when you think about transport electrification in New Zealand, you put a litre of electricity into your car in Auckland, it's probably a litre of wind, water, geothermal steam, predominantly. Do the same thing in Dubai, and you're putting in a litre of, probably burning 2 litres of electricity equivalent for your car. So New Zealand's got this great opportunity to stand up in front of the world and say, here's our competitive advantage in energy, here's a city that's going forward, come and be with us.
Thanks, Scott. So Victoria, Zero has a unique perspective on the world, I think, in terms of what you've launched and what you're doing. So can I put the same question to you? It's around smart city.
Yeah, absolutely. So it won't be surprising I talk a lot about the importance of technology, and actually our history shows that some of these things will happen, but our continued appetite for putting up barriers to them remains absolutely impressive. So I was talking to someone the other day who read this book and was talking about when the first elevators were introduced and how they had to have health and safety people stand, or nurses standing at the elevators making sure that people were okay when we went up and down. And it's like, yeah, that's how we're approaching things, but actually we're okay, we're all good. So, smart city for me, so I wrote down the words of, these are the things that come to mind: innovative, creative, collaborative, community-driven and inclusive, progressive, bold, and yes, I had technology-driven in terms of a smart city. And why did I add that one in? Because, there's a lot of discussion around is technology enabler, or is technology, part of it. And I actually believe Auckland needs a technology strategy. We don't have anything in the Auckland 2020 vision and 2040 vision plan around technology. And why is that? That is because the world is getting faster. So the Industrial Revolution, 150 years, the Internet Revolution is taking, we'll talk about 50 years, we're just about through that, and we're now starting the Industrial Internet Revolution, which is putting the smarts of internet and connectivity into manufacturing and machinery. That will smash through us in 20 years. So everything we are doing is getting faster and faster, and we can choose to try and hold that off, or we can choose to be progressive, regulate, and embrace and manage it as it comes through. I do believe that we are behind in our thinking. New Zealand is behind in our thinking compared to other countries in the technology space, and I think Auckland is as well. And that's, I think, you were very brave, but absolutely right in saying that people don't want to come to work in Auckland for the amazing things that we do. People want to come and work in Auckland to have a nice lifestyle. They're now shocked by the prices they have to pay to come and live in Auckland as a business person to enjoy their lifestyle. So I think we are behind in our thinking. We need more skills in our sector. So Paul Callaghan said, whether it's Auckland or New Zealand actually, that we need more high productivity sectors. And you look at the productivity of New Zealand, and we are not growing the productiveness of our people. In fact, the gap between us and other nations is growing significantly. So we really need to challenge ourselves and think about that, because it reinforces come here for a lifestyle, don't come here to create wealth, a business and global opportunities. So we do need to diversify into higher productivity and skilled jobs. We have so many incredible immigrants that sit there driving taxis or sitting in call centres because they can't utilise their skills due to regulations in industry. So whether that's doctors, engineers, scientists, when I worked in telecom, the people we had in our call centre were phenomenal, trained engineers, they were scientists, they had incredible degrees. So how do we find a way to bring them into our economy more? And again, the regulations are key to that. There's loads of work happening in the entrepreneurial space in Auckland, so there's Dojo, the Lightning Lab, all of that. There's a lot of work happening there, which is great. And I would love to see more of that kind of applied pressure into the corporate space around innovation. We are quite laggard in our approach. It's very hard to innovate in a corporate. Why is that important? Because we want corporates coming here to New Zealand to base their offices not out of Australia or somewhere else, and you have to be leading edge thinkers for that to happen. We need to bring our Kiwis back. It's really hard to bring our successful Kiwis back here, again because it's more around lifestyle as opposed to business and opportunity. I am a big fan of sensors and getting that into our cities, and that's because there's so much data there that then you can make much smarter decisions around your cities once you're collecting that data. We have a global top 10 broadband connectivity network on our doorstep with USB. So once that's finished in about 3 or 4 years, we'll be a top 10 country for connectivity. Nowhere in the discussion is anything around why do people need to drive to work anymore? I've got like 100 megs or 200 megs of connectivity between my house and a corporate head office. The network that we have put in place in the ground has 3 or 4 network connections like that. I can have 100 megs for my personal use. I can have a dedicated network into my house to my corporate, 100 to 100 megs. Why do they all need to come into town? Well, it's just ridiculous that we continue to think like that. Who is trying the opportunities around between corporates or councils and trying these opportunities for remote working and really learning about it and saying how do we do a lot more of that. And then my final point, it's not my final, but I feel like I'm talking too much, is the importance of design and experience. And I think that's what Xero has absolutely cracked. And we've cracked that globally, is when you bring beautiful design and a beautiful experience to something, and Uber's exactly the same. When you crack that, then people will come flocking. And so how do we crack that for Auckland, and how do we think about it as an end-to-end experience for Auckland, not just when you come through the airport. We're doing a great job of what your Auckland airport experience, then try and get into the city, which is a bit of a nightmare. Then you get in the city, we might have some great individual experiences around it, but we're not kind of cracking it. So I think we need to trial a whole lot of stuff. We need to go find some global partners. If Christchurch can attract Google with those balloons, then we can attract some driverless cars here or something here. We're small, we're nimble, and we need to trial shit to get our reputation up in terms of being innovative, being a great place to come. And that's it.
Goodness. Interesting enough, I was asked to speak specifically on the target of design and green. And so I'll kind of approach that. In particular, I think, personally, that we all know that the statistics towards urbanisation are driving upwards. And so this challenge that's in front of us is I think, is not particularly new to us. What I particularly like about what Caroline was referring to was very much around the fact that the question for us is, and very well eloquently put, I think, is are we prepared to shift our city to one that's focused on human capacity and people? And secondly, are we prepared to do that in a way which actually has a level of equity and parity that sits there? What I'm talking about is the use of resources, and this is the connecting to the green. Is it appropriate that or are we currently actually sharing our resources in an appropriate way? Personally, I think that we have to be absolutely in the tech-enabled space, but we have to be because without it, we won't be able to be enabled to be able to participate in the global conversation. I actually don't see tech as the outcome. Tech is the enabler, but so is our built environment in the same way. And it was interesting that when a lot of the work that we do with organisational design, one of the challenges we put to organisations is, so can you answer 3 questions? Do you have a sense of purpose? Do your people have a sense of purpose? Do they have a sense of belonging? Do they have a sense of place? And there's a very good reason for that, because as we can all imagine, it's actually very, very hard to be enlightened, be energetic, be excited about what you do every day if you fundamentally don't believe in the purpose that you're undertaking every day. It's very, very hard to do that if you fundamentally don't believe that you are part of a group that believe in it. And I think that's where, when I look at organisations like Xero, I don't think you've just cracked the experience design piece, you've actually cracked the culture piece as well. And I've just, from the few people that I know there, they are advocates for what they do every day because they have a strong sense of social purpose in what they're doing. They have a real belief in where they're going. And so I think as a city, we need to think about the city in a similar context. And then the last one around the sense of place is, why is that important? Well, it's actually probably the most tangible and immediate response that people have when they experience an environment. I think interesting enough, the green building sector, and I'll just shift into the green space momentarily, a city is an organism. And if we look into nature and look at the best organisms in the world, they are holistic in the way they go about it. And there is very, very few examples in the natural environment whereby waste is not somehow in a recycled, holistic, closed-loop system, except for humans. And I look at that and I think very, very much that, that as a city we need to think of ourselves as a closed-loop system. So we need to be thinking much more about the community type space, but I'm also thinking about the fact that we need to think about our systems and how our systems can be more interconnected. And I think the comments that were made about some of the potential difficulties of working through regulation to actually come up with different solutions is actually disabling us from doing that. However, the green building sector, I think, has to have a good, long, hard look at itself, and I should probably disclose here, I'm the chairman of the New Zealand Green Building Council. We need to have a good, long, hard look at ourselves because we have been focused very much on the performance of individual buildings, not really considering beyond the site boundary. So we've allowed this imaginary line that goes around a piece of land to somehow disable us from those buildings to be actually as proficient as they could be. So we need to be thinking much more about communities. And when I'm saying that, I'm talking about any type of community. For example, the business community, and how can multiple businesses actually work together in a much more collective and collaborative way, in a way that actually uses the resources and builds capacity in those resources. So I guess within that, for me, technology, absolutely yes, but technology, in my view, don't be fooled that smart city means technology. Technology is the enabler, the built environment is the enabler. What we have to focus on is people.
Thank you, Tim. I want to put one final question to all four of you. Perhaps, Caroline, if you can finish up for us before we go to Q&A. And that's just around sort of looking 10 years in the future. So we have plans, aspirations and strategies, but the question I want to put is kind of what's kind of the ideal connectivity and engagement in your sector in 10 years' time?
Yeah, the sector that doesn't do anything but enables everything to be done. So if you could roll the clock forward, it's not as sexy as Xero. Roll the clock forward 10 years and Auckland's achieved magnet city status, and I guess I'd like to think that the electricity sector is part of the branding story that's helped it to get there. So I guess if you think about New Zealand as a farm or a factory or a technology lab or a tourism destination or whatever it is that you're doing, then Auckland is going to be the sales and marketing engine that puts those goods and services on the global stage. And I'd like to think that the electricity sector can be behind those products and services and giving them credibility in terms of the renewables, the low-cost green energy that help those products get to market, be successful, and drive more export, drive more investment, drive more tourism, have a wealthier, growing country. At domestic level, 10 years down the track, I'd like to think that a few fleets have tuned over and there's a few more electric vehicles out in the market, and mums and dads are starting to drive them, and then thinking about what that's important on a lot of levels for New Zealand. So reinforcing that clean, green, renewable place that we love to be. And imagine walking down Queen Street breathing the clean air. There's a few less diesel Golfs parting up the highway. And think about the impact on your wallet as your total energy spend goes down. So by subbing out a couple of $1,000 worth of $2 a litre petrol into your petrol tank and replacing that with 30 cents a litre electricity, and so your total energy spend is improving, and that's great for all of us, but more importantly, how does that flow through to Auckland's most vulnerable consumers and help them to have warmer, drier, healthier homes and be able to afford to manage that. So those are sort of a few things that I think would be nice to drive. Electricity is only an enabler. It's going to stand behind a growing economy, hopefully, stand behind healthier, wealthier homes, happier people. Ultimately, it comes down to what people are doing in technology, what people are doing to drive commerce, and how electricity as an industry can stand underneath that. And really that comes down to the same thing we've been doing for 100 years of innovation, is make sure you've got a reliable grid that delivers low cost, clean, green energy for consumers so they can get on and do the things that they love doing that drive growth for the country and take us along.
Right. Well, I'd love to see in 10 years that Auckland is a place where people want to come to work and live. And we've kind of gotten over this. I mean, no one in the rest of New Zealand really wants to come to Auckland because everyone hates us. And so we kind of solved that. So your whole point around, we're not growing Auckland at the expense of the rest of New Zealand. We're growing Auckland in an inclusive way along with the rest of New Zealand. I think there's a big outcome we should be focused on. And then when you turn and look globally, that people want to come here to live. And I think, okay, so what could that look like? So we're on the doorstep of Asia, which is where the biggest economic shift is happening and will be for some time. So perhaps we create ourselves a reputation of absolutely cracking how you do business with Asia. We have some really cultural alignment between Maori and Asia in the way that we can do business. So perhaps companies in Europe and the States now start to look to Auckland as the way, because we intimately understand how you do business with Asia because we're on the doorstep, etc., etc. I don't know, but we find some sort of way to really think about how we can compete with the rest of the world in that space. We talked about inclusiveness. I think our population will be very different. It's changing rapidly. So we will have less than the majority that's Pākehā, so there will be more non-Pākehā than we are, and we'll have an ageing population. And that brings quite different needs. And also I think that brings a lot of opportunity. So we've got to correct actually how to deal with that. We have a heart in the community. I don't know that Auckland quite has a heart in the community and a spirit, like some of the other areas around, some of the other cities and many cities around New Zealand do. So we've kind of really understood that. To your point, we've cracked how to manage a complex adaptive system, and that it's not a system that stops when a new challenge or a new piece of technology comes along. It's always adapting. Yes, it's complex, but we've cracked how to keep that up to date with the challenge that come along with it, rather than seeing it as a static system that you regulate at points in time. We've diversified our economy, so zero no longer has a problem hiring our tech people. And I think the other big one, which I haven't talked about yet, but I think is really, really important along with the ageing population, is that we've cracked the concept of lifelong learning. And so with technology as an enabler, it's so much easier to learn these days, and it's not just easy to learn in schools, but you look at all these kids who have YouTube channels, and actually there's a range of adults. So if I want to learn about a new piece of software now, I just go to YouTube, and there's about 15 different channels that I can learn for one, this is just one piece of software. So learning is no longer hard, it's just about you reaching out, and it's in a very global environment. So how have we brought a lot more of that to our communities and to our ageing population? And finally, we've got fibre everywhere, we've got Wi-Fi, and we have some driverless cars running around.
And super digital speed, right?
No, because they're picking my kids up from school. Actually, I won't have kids there who need to
No. Yeah, look, the theme that was, it is just such a no-brainer this issue of connected and electric vehicles. We are blessed in this country, and I was chatting to Phil about this before, but something in the order of 80% renewable. That is the envy of the developed world. It's a point of difference we don't celebrate. So we've got to stop looking at other people's models and imagining that they apply here, because our context is radically different. And I saw a statistic a number of years ago, and I won't even try to quote it, but it just horrified me at the time, the amount of our primary export earning industries, so that's agriculture, in particular I refer to agriculture and tourism, that is needed simply to offset our fossil fuel importation, was horrifying. So can you imagine if this city turned around and made one step, which was we are going to embrace technology, we're going to embrace the fact that we have clean, green electricity, we're going to use that to the max. What would that do for the economy of this country? It would be like an injection that you would get into your GDP overnight, relatively speaking, in economic terms. I think the other thing that I'd love to think that Auckland could reach towards, and Victoria started to touch on it actually, we're not in this world by ourselves. This country is an amazing country. One of the biggest risks I think we've got is that becoming a magnet city actually turns into the fact that everything gets sucked towards Auckland to the detriment of the rest of the country. And that applies culturally, it applies economically, it applies socially. And I think we've got a responsibility as we start to crack through these things. So looking forward 10 years, could we imagine where we have a nation that turn around and go, isn't Auckland amazing? Look at what it's doing. Look at what it's doing on the international stage. Look at the reputation it's building internationally. They're all starting to have pride, and Auckland becomes the All Blacks of New Zealand economy because people love it, not because they just like the game, right? So I think, for me, I think definitely there are some real opportunities we've just touched on. In amongst that, though, I still believe very, very strongly in the fact that, personally, that it's about being able to enhance human endeavour, wellness, capacity, well-being. And to be able to do that, we need to take responsibility also for what we're doing to the planet itself. And that's my personal view. Because I think ultimately these things are so interconnected that if we don't get into that space. So we need to free ourselves up from and be able to have some serious conversations about some of the connected infrastructure that we have, the fact that, are people aware that if a building like this is set up correctly, that it actually produces water? And the reason is because everybody who comes into it every day are actually vessels that are carrying water, right? So at the moment what we do, we pollute it all and we put it all out and we expect somebody else to take care of it. And you just sit there going, we can crack this stuff. It's there, the technology is really available to us. So, just in sum up for me, absolutely using technologies, using the smarts we have like these renewable energies, and at the same time taking a strong planetary responsibility. And all of these systems are available to us, I think, within reach right now, if we can partially get some of the research underway. So, I think you're next.
Do you have a response to that?
I don't even know where to start. It was fascinating. So I'll be super quick and not answer the question. So in 10 years' time, goodness knows where I'll be. But what I would love is, let's pretend I'm sitting in London, is, London, like lots of big cities, we get very obsessed about the next new thing and where it's coming from, okay? So when Uber, we were one of the first Uber cities, we were obsessed with Uber. We thought we were amazing because we were becoming an Uber city very quickly. I remember 5 years ago, it was Krispy Kreme donuts, available at Harrods as the first place out of the United States. People lined up around the block for donuts. There was a whole gamut of things. So in 10 years' time, I would like some of those things coming from Auckland. So rather than me having to come to Auckland, Auckland is coming and touching me wherever I am, whether it's London, whether it's New York, and to have that happen. And I certainly do think that technology could be the big play, so whether it's software in driverless cars that has been tested in Auckland, I think is fabulous. And I think one of the huge benefits and advantages is you have one of the best prototype testing places on the planet. I think that's absolutely right. And really playing with that. And I was reminded of doing a lot of work for a client in the UK at the moment that involves a big facility that you may have heard of called Myra, which is probably the most sophisticated automotive facility in all of Europe. It's a consortium of Jaguar, Land Rover, and 2 other automobile companies. It's called MIRA. And so what they do is for all the connectivity between cars, they have spaces that have literally 3,000 Wi-Fi devices. So that if you are a car testing connectivity between other cars, as we were talking about, in different cities, what they can do is actually create the Wi-Fi system. So it mirrors Paris, it mirrors New York. That's one example of a whole variety of things that they do. Why aren't facilities like that here? That's exactly what should be happening. And so my final point to leave you with is, for that to happen, it is not necessarily the role of the state. And that is why I get a little wound up about the smart city language, is because it sort of comes with it this view that you then need to essentially tender and procure this stuff for the public good by a government. And that is entirely the opposite of what all of this stuff is supposed to be about. So in order for the city to change whether or not, there is a view to go in the direction that we've all been talking about, it is essentially not up to the city government. It is not up to the national government. Because getting the likes of a Myra facility here or an analogous facility, it's up to all of the businesses, people going and having those conversations. So I think to get the outcome that I described at the beginning, it's up to all of you guys to do that, not necessarily the politicians, the bureaucrats, anyone else. So I would throw the challenge back.